Hello,
Hi, how are you? I'm so glad to see you.
welcome, welcome. You were,
Hi.
yeah, we're starting late today, so I'm glad you know that. Well, later than we did last year, so people were
Oh,
coming
oh,
in. Sorry, Dene, please go ahead. I interrupted you.
no, I'm just glad
Sorry.
you're here. Frode and I are, because this is part of our grant, we're meeting from 8 to 8:30 first on Mondays, and then everybody will pour in at
Oh,
8:30.
that's
And
all
we'll,
right. It's
so
great to see
good.
you too.
And then
I'm
we're going to start
Abhirami.
by introducing you today. So if you can tell everybody like when we start, who you are, what you're doing, why you're interested, that'd be great.
All right. So I'm Abhirami Ajith. I'm a PhD scholar in English
Hang on.
from.
Wait till everybody comes. We got people coming. So here's
All
Mark.
right.
Wait for everybody to get here. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hi,
Know
no,
that Rob Swigart's coming, Leon's coming, Fabien will be here. So we're going to have we usually have about 6 to 10 people on normal Mondays.
Yeah, normal Monday. This is
And
not
Peter's
normal
not
Monday
going to be
though.
here.
This is the first Monday of the year, so it's super extra
Oh my
special
God.
Monday.
Yeah, this is my first day of classes, and you can start to hear that because I have the sound on. You're going to hear lots of beeping. That's all the email.
Oh
And
yeah,
my favorite thing, Mark, is that people will write me and say, I want to talk to you about coming to your university and majoring in your program. And I say, when do you want to start? Next year. It's like, don't write me today about this. I'm, I'm, I'm dealing with people that are trying to get in classes today. People trying to get in over packed classes. Like, no. Next, I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Go away. Hey, everybody. Good morning, Rob.
oh, you stepped away. You'll be
He can
back.
hear me. He can hear me. Who is in it? Who is ENS?
I'm Elijah Schwirian. I was there at the symposium.
Oh, good. Can you turn your picture on for a second? Let me see you. So I can put a face to you can turn it back off, but let me just see who you. Hi, good to see
I had a
you.
mask on the whole time.
I
Yeah,
know. I'm good to see
and
you.
yeah,
I'm glad you're here.
very glad.
We are waiting for Leon. He should be here soon, and Fabien will be here. So that's good. That's a good turnout today.
I just texted them, come back, because they
I'm
were
back.
really early.
Here comes
Ah, Chris,
Chris.
very good.
That's good. Hey, Rob, thanks for the gift you're sending me.
Whoop, you are welcome.
I tell you what, I'm going to get a lot of people mad at me that I'm going to have the I've been guessing it's the hypercard work that William Dickey did, right?
Yeah, it's a zip drive, so
Yeah, I'm going to
I
have
presume
Mark.
you have one.
I'm going to have Matthew Kirschenbaum furious that he doesn't have it. I'll share it with him. He collects the Dickey stuff, so I'll make sure he gets a copy of it.
Okay, good.
Well, Frodo, we'll get started in maybe one more minute.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just trying to get Fabian and let's see what's happening once. Yeah, we're trying to do the whole what's it called?
So
Um,
let me ask, so everybody knows that starting this year, year two of this final year of our grant, on Mondays, we're starting at 8:30 now because Frode and I are meeting from 8 to 8:30. And that's because it's my fault. It's my fault because it is 7 o'clock is too early for me to meet on Mondays. I'm just not a human being before 8 o'clock in the morning. So for Frode and I to meet and prepare for the week, we were doing it from 8 to 8:30. So I appreciate everybody understanding that. If you're on the West Coast, you probably would agree.
yeah.
When Frode was here visiting, he said, golly, 8 o'clock in the morning is awfully early for meetings. I'm like, uh-huh. Yep. Good morning, Fabienne.
Hello, hello, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So, Frode, do you want to start and introduce our new guests?
Yeah, just clicking, sending you a message about what you just said. Yeah, I hope Leon will come here as well. He was here and then he got, yeah. Uh, yes, we can do that. We should all introduce ourselves. Dene, since you are on my screen top left, do you mind continuing a little bit with your introduction, which is appropriate since you're the lead PI on the project anyway?
Hi. So yeah, I'm glad to meet you. And you say, is it Amira? Is that how you say your name? Amira?
I'm Abhirami.
Benami. Okay, glad to meet you. And I'm Dene Grigar. I'm at Washington State University, Vancouver, in the United States, right across the river from Portland, Oregon. And I've been here, this is my 19th year. And this is my second year with the Future of Text project with Frode as an official member. I've kind of flown in and out periodically in the past. But it's good to meet you. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
And I'm second on the screen. So yes, Dene and I have been working on this officially for a year. The project has been longer, as Dene mentioned. I've been lucky enough to go to the great state of Washington twice. And to my great disappointment, it turns out to have the same weather as my hometown in Norway. So yes, it was very cold, but super warm environment. Last year, we worked primarily on reading in XR. This year, we'll be working on authoring in XR. However, these Monday calls will be quite open to the future of texts, including basically everything. And we are going to have more organized themes and presentations, including Bob Horn on the 20th. If you go to the website, you can click on a calendar link, so your calendar can automatically fill in who will be coming, which will be pretty good. And I will try to say your name now as training. My name's difficult for a lot of people too, but Abhirami, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Abhirami Ajith, and I'm a PhD scholar in English at IIT Kanpur, India. So currently I'm connecting from Kerala, which is my hometown. It is a southern state in India, but like I go to IIT Kanpur, which is in the northern side of the country. I work on contemporary experimental fiction, the intersections of print and digital, the materialities, and also the modalities of reading. And it's great to connect with you all. And I hope to really learn from all the sessions. And I don't know what to expect, also, I'm really excited.
That was a very succinct introduction. I'm impressed. I hope you take that as a proper compliment, because usually people like me tend to waffle on forever. So thank you and welcome. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Mark, you're next. So good to see you.
Hello, Happy New Year to all. Can you hear me all right? Yep, okay. Right, sorry. Yes, here I am in cold and rainy Portsmouth, South UK. I'm basically been doing things in the future of text since about 2017 when I sort of met up with Frode when we were both studying the same department, Southampton, where I was doing a doctorate. My subject really is hypertext, and essentially now I'm a hypertext researcher, sort of semi-independent, doing some stuff for the university. And of late, I've got interested in the implicit nature of remediation that's involved in the XR work we're doing. So once you stick anything into the sort of digital domain, such as XR, it is no longer what it used to be, which poses interesting questions about, sort of last century lit crypt thinking about the difference between author and reader and all this sort of thing. So lots to unpack. Thanks.
Rob, you are in the middle of our screen. So if we do one of those TV things, you have to look around at everyone.
I'm in the middle of my screen too.
Good.
I'm a writer, so the second year is of more interest to me than the first year, perhaps, because I'm interested in how we might create in VR. I have dipped into hypertext and done a little fooling around in that area. So I'm here to learn, and maybe I can contribute something along the road. But it's nice to meet you. I have a son-in-law from India, so I've got a little bit of a connection there.
Rob, you have, of course, already contributed volumes. And for those who know, that's a play on word, because Rob was suggesting we use the word volume for text and XR, not as a volume as a book, but a volume as a space. So yes, that is a good, big contribution. And then we have the next one. You have your camera off, which is fine. But you just have ENS. Could you maybe write your first name because it's easier for the transcription afterwards, if you don't mind? And also
Should I
retention.
just write that in chat, or is there something I should do for that?
Chat is fine either way for today. What do you
Okay,
think,
thank you.
Dene?
That's fine.
Okay.
There we go. That's my name.
And yeah, sorry. I will mute myself. Sorry.
I'm Elijah Schwirian. I'm from Mississippi, and I just got introduced to all of this at the most recent symposium because I have been writing a fiction series that is focused on language to some degree. That interest brought me to this group through my friend Carl Smink. I am a philosophy student that is looking to get his master's in anti-corruption.
Wow. Okay.
Which fits right into XR.
Kind of wonder who you're going to have to bribe to get that master's. But anyway, thank you and good to see you again. And Chris, hey, sorry for having to send you away and come back. It's the whole new timing thing.
All good. Happy New Year, everyone. And sorry if my voice is a little croaky. I'm a little bit under the weather. But anyway, I'm a software engineer and independent researcher. Done some work in distributed and decentralized systems. I have a personal project called InfoCentral that's kind of working on that, trying to find an intersection with the AI revolution at this point. So it's pending some new work, but nothing to announce quite yet. So.
Thank you, Chris. And Fabien.
Hello, so my name is Fabien. I'm also from a country with a weather so bad that I must focus on reading and writing and more in Brussels, Belgium, for a bit more context. I was looking down during the presentation because I was playing before the call on a little Zen clock kit. Why do I show this? Because as some of you know that I have a bunch of gadgets around, but a lot of those gadgets, like also the latest, like I did a bit of figurine painting, which is ridiculously small. It's a little night thing. I don't know if it can be in focus.
Super cool.
I never thought I would, when I opened the box, I was like, this is not for me. This was a mistake, but through training. And why do I show all this is because I do also, there's a bit of Lego in the background. But basically I do prototyping, mostly around software. This is my actual expertise. And recently with a focus on XR, so VR and AR, and uniquely on the web. And I'm not a writer, but I have a wiki, which I have been managing or curating for more than a decade now, which is about all those things I'm doing. So taking notes from a very pragmatic viewpoint. None of it is beautiful, let's say. I don't think anybody would enjoy reading it for the pleasure of traditional reading, let's say, but it's a bunch of tools or steps that help me learn along the way. And I'm here thanks to Brandel, because through a couple of discussions of like, oh, but how can we keep on improving the tooling around thinking and learning and building software and anything else, really? I've met this group a couple of years ago, and I'm still here. So I do think it's a bunch of very exciting and interesting discussion. So yeah, happy to be here again with you all.
And Fabien, of course, this year is in charge of actually realizing visions, which is going to be interesting. And just briefly before I introduce you, Brandel, so Fabien, you mentioned showed the little figure. It's something we may need to discuss at some point as an alternative to XR, because like many of you, I played Dungeons and Dragons in my wasted youth. And that's basically, you have a little metal thing painted on a table, and that's all you have. Everything else takes place in your head, which is kind of, in a way, the opposite of XR, where everything is visual. So that might be a very interesting counterpoint discussion. So thank you, Fabien, for bringing that up. And Brandel, Happy New Year and good morning.
Good evening. My name is Brandel, and I have been working with and playing with the idea of reading and writing in virtual reality for the last, I'd say, decade now. Um, and I'm responsible for web standards at Apple for spatial computing. So Apple Vision Pro, what the web looks like that in a browser in a way that pertains to what dimensionality is. And I was very excited to bring the emphasis of AR/VR to this group a couple of years ago, so that we can think more sort of concretely about that spatialization. Um, my main emphasis, or my main intent within the context of spatial computing and spatializing the web in particular is to be able to get at embodied cognition and extended mind. This idea that we have a long history and experience of thinking with our whole bodies as well as just with our minds, and also with the spaces around us. And that if we have the ability to construct spaces as well as to involve whole body gestures and actions and poses that allow us to understand information better as well as to express information better, then we'll be better at thinking, possibly not by a little, but by a lot.
That should have been the foreword to the book. Maybe it will be for the next one. Brandel did come into this community at the right time. I was just, Mark Anderson raced through his PhD, and I managed to submit mine. And then just my head was full of all that stuff. I refused to think of AR, AI or VR, anything. Handed it in, and then Brandel said, now is a good time. So that was perfect. So Brandel, thank you for expanding my mind, and I'm sure a lot of others in the community as well. So this year, we're going to be looking at authorship, and I'm wondering if Dene and I are going through as the official investigators in this, going through some decisions. And some of them are very easy. Some of them come straight basically through the agreement we have with the Sloan Foundation. But we thought it could be interesting to discuss some of them with you guys to get a feel for where we are, because the questions, some of them are contradictory, some of them are confusing. But if you please click on the link, then what I would like to do is race through the headings with you first, and then we can decide on what to really look at, because any of these can take a full week of discussion, and that's obviously not the point of today. Please, first of all, actually read the bit on the top called the research question. That's kind of crucial.
Let me mention that we want to start with the research, even though the Sloan grant is not a research grant, it's a production grant. We're writing this for academics, essentially. And so you can't be an academic without a research question. So we're starting the year off with the research question focused on year 2, which is about authoring. So that's what Frode and I worked on for a couple of days, I guess, over the last couple of days or so. And then we went through most of these this morning. Some of them, this was a long document, so we didn't get through all of them. We may not get to all of them today, but it does, if we start with this research question, then everything else kind of makes some sense. And for those of you just joining us, year 1 of our grant was on reading. And the thing that we of course, it made sense. You can't separate reading and writing. And we had proposed to Sloan that we'd focus on reading in year 1 and writing in year 2, or authoring in year 2. So as we were working on the reading part, we still had to think about the authoring part. And now as we're working on authoring, we still had to think about reading, because they're inextricably linked.
Yeah, that's so important, Dene. Now, while Dene and I went through this, we were looking at, obviously, we would like to get further funding. And the only way to get further funding is if the funders really like the work. Simple. And mentally, and these meetings are on the record, so it sounds funny, but I could imagine our funders saying to someone else, oh yeah, we funded this small little resource thing on reading and writing in XR. And what they found out was, and there's a sentence of something new. I think, honestly, that's the key, right? And I think that really helps our thinking too, because every user who should try whatever we make, build, produce, they should have a feeling of, oh, when it comes to authoring in XR, there's also this small thing. So in a very real sense, what we're working on here is theater, but it's theater based on experience and experimenting rather than just plainly being shown stuff. So before we go through the headings, I just want to highlight the focus on the user. That's already decided by the grant anyway. Last year we did ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery Hypertext. This year we're going to focus on our own book. That's going to be the main corpus of documents. And we're going to be a bit radical and say XR matters. Some things can go in and out of 2D, which is important to me. I make a word processor in 2D. I want to be able to interact with this as a sample external thing. But the key thing is XR. And if it sucks if it won't work for the other places, but it's okay. Otherwise, we're not pushing ourselves. We are targeting academics in general, not students, because then you get pedagogy and all kinds of things in there that's basically out of scope. And then we're looking at thinking and communicating. These are obvious things, but they help us focus a little bit. So the sections we'll discuss, all of us in a minute, is a little bit about what do we mean by documents? What are the interactions that have to happen? And how do we feel about XR, our community feelings? And then do we have any small or big thoughts on the visual style? Purely superficial. And then reflections on the experience of being in XR, which I think has changed for many of us over the year, at least it has for me. A bit of thinking in space, composing these volumes that Rob mentioned. Well, we mentioned that Rob mentioned. And then towards the end, we should look at what kind of workspaces to build. Are we going to have a reading room, a writing room, etc.? And at the very end of this, and this is mostly for you, Fabien, what are the infrastructures that need to be developed for that to be possible? So let's have a look at the documents. There's no point me reading this to you, so please just read that little section and see if you have any thoughts or comments. A way I may summarize it, because the writing is a little thoughty, is are we basically going from one end, which would be like a CD-ROM or a website where you enter a document and it takes over everything. It's a locked experience. Or are we talking about producing a volume that can easily coexist with other volumes when you're following connections or doing comparisons? These are not mutually exclusive, but we need to have thoughts on where we tend to want to lean in the beginning. The penalty of not speaking is that Dene and I will speak. What do you guys think? You must have thoughts on this.
It's hard to know what to say, I'm sure, but I think what we're trying to do is get the way we want to proceed this year, because last year was just so much interaction that we couldn't move forward very well, right? Everybody was commenting, we're being pulled different directions, and I think this year, based on what our conversation during the conference and thereafter, that we want to consolidate a little bit more and be a little more organized. So Frode and I are coming up with things together as PIs on this grant, and then presenting them to you all, so that if there's anything that we've missed, anything you think we should be thinking about, something that you thought about, we want to hear your input on this. But we're not going to like throw something out and say, what do you think? What do you want us to do? We have a sense of what we want to do, but we certainly want your input on these things. Okay, so that's, if you don't have anything to say, that's fine. but know that we respect your opinion, else we would not have these meetings. All right, hello. Brandel has his hand up, and then Rob.
So a couple of things that I played with that I think sort of speak to that point of that continuum, Dene, that you mentioned between reading and writing. I read Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. Hate
Yeah.
it. He's so wrong. I was really surprised because I thought I was going to get along with the guy, and he's just complaining, and it's this absolute grievance. One of the things that I did though to read it is I read it out loud in parts, and then I just sort of responded to it myself. Like I reacted to it because I was in the groove of making utterances. It was really interesting as a process to go from speaking Postman's words into into my own reactions to it, because it meant that the lexicon was really literally on the tip of my tongue. I was doing those things, and so it made me think it would be a really interesting way of constructing an environment for the purposes of writing for critique. And a computer should hopefully be able to recognize, even if speech recognition is not perfect, what you're saying is some corpus that's actually up on screen, particularly if you're sight reading it, versus when you're riffing ad lib, and be able to kind of connect that to what was the most connected component of the document. So I had a lot of fun with that. It was really interesting. I didn't read the whole book like that, but I didn't. I think I will try to read the next big good book like that. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then the other thing is, I don't know if I think I've shown you before, if people have seen. But one of the things that I have been exploring with this HTML model element is the idea of a performance capture with an object. I have on Sketchfab, there's a little model airplane that Apple released as part of Reality Composer Pro. I broke it into pieces so that it has the flaps and the ailerons and the rudder all kind of movable. And what I do in this little performance is I pick it up, and you can see my head and hands. I pick it up and I move it around, and I kind of point to the different parts of it, and I talk about its aerodynamic properties. And the idea of these performances, these constructions of voice and gesture and object, I think are a really interesting component of authorship per se, where there's objects, but we actually encode our interactions with them as something that denotes some kind of authorial intent. It's like it's writing, but it's not. So those are two things that I'm really interested in pursuing. I'll dig up the link for the airplane. The Sketchfab doesn't have the audio with it. I'll put that up somewhere. But yeah, I'm really excited about those things, and I would love to expound on those such that people can kind of pursue them as well if it's of interest.
Great. So let me respond to you, Brandel. Yesterday, I had to review an essay for a journal that's getting ready to be published, right? Wonderful article. And so there's a lot of work and I had to analyze it, respond to it, figure out what was missing in the article, like what historical information was missing. So it was a historical look at this one artist. Mark, you know her, Judy Malloy, right? It was looking at her BBS work, her Bad Information project, which was really great project from the 80s. And so, what was missing from it historically, what was this well documented, was the research thorough? So I had a lot of notes, and then I had to turn those notes into a piece of writing and submit that to the journal. And it's a Smithsonian, right? So it's a really great journal, historical journal. And so I can imagine that that's exactly what we're doing with this project, right? But doing it in XR and doing it so that we're imagining that world in XR. And as I mentioned to Frode this morning, when my program teaches web design, we start with mobile first. We do not start with the browser. We start with mobile, and then we move to browser, because we want to think in mobile. And in this case, for us, I want us to think in 3D. So I don't want us to build and think in 2D and then transform it into 3D and imagine what that is. I want us to already be pushing our brains to think in this notion of depth and complete surround environment. Right. So 360, but also 3D. And so, okay, Rob, your hand is up, and then Mark.
I have to leave soon, but I just wanted to say that I'm interested. I asked Bill Atkinson recently if he could build a hypercard for VR. I'm not sure what it would include, particularly in how you would manipulate stuff in three-dimensional space, but I'm interested in how we might tell stories, maybe with multiple documents. And he told me to get somebody younger, and that's not me. So I'm hoping this year we'll develop something that I can mess around with to build something in VR that would be of narrative interest.
I don't think age has anything to do with it, Rob. I beg to differ. So tell Atkinson
I'm not a programmer. I was making a joke on it, but tomorrow is my birthday, so I'm aware of it now.
Is it 2? Are we adding the 2 after your first digit?
I wish.
Happy birthday tomorrow, Rob.
You're adding a 4.
Oh, 4.
Happy birthday.
Mark, you had your hand up.
Okay, I've got to go.
All right, bye. Smooches, bye.
Just a couple of things. One is, and it's not a question really for us to resolve or answer today, but I think is to flesh out the sort of the rather grey edge between authoring and writing, and in a sense, writing in the sense of doing what we used to do, say, on paper, or authoring, which is sort of writing in different form, but it's probably composing on a slightly larger canvas. I think that's something to be wrinkled out. And as we're trying to do, this work, as you rightly say, sort of primarily in Excel to start with, is actually to think about something I've just been dragged back into by a current hypertext paper I'm working on with somebody else, but and sort of thinking about this split between the author and the reader's role. There's lots of sort of lit crypt from the early days of computers saying it's all gone wrong. It's because there's no longer the separation we used to have. And I think it's time to revisit that. We're in a different era now. We're in the post-print era. And so I think it sort of behoves us in looking at this is to actually think about that relationship between the shift from writing to reading, whether we actually want to do it in different spaces or not, or whether we can do it together.
Great. And before you say anything, thank you, Mark. Elijah has written a question in our comment into the chat. When it comes to XR 3D test, I wonder if it would be necessary to create a language that by its nature is 3D as well. That's great. I love that idea. The Inca had a method of writing called the quipu, a set of chords or rope string that log various things as a 3D object. It's the only form of 3D writing that comes to mind. If we want to use 3D to its potential, we need to form a language for it. I think that could probably, that's definitely an interesting question that can be a side quest question, right? Which we encourage. Forcing our 2D text into 3D is clumsy. That's why voice. If you think about it, Elijah, this is what Walter Ong talks about in the second orality. He kind of gestures towards this idea. So we're looking at returning to voice potentially, right? So it's not outside the scope of the project at all. I would call it tangential, right? As a side quest. Okay, so Frode?
Oh, so much meat. Oh. First of all, Mark, yes, it's kind of shocking to me that we don't have a lot of clarification in the language. The difference between writing in one of my articles in our book, I tried to do sentence composition versus document composition, which is quite weak, I know. But at least for ourselves, we need to get the terminology straight of what we're talking about. Because I do think that probably till the end of time, at some point, it'll be valuable to write on a little card with a keyboard. But that's not the whole story. And the bigger issue that is coming up with 3D language is really, really important. There's been a discussion back and forth with Bob Horn on something that I put in our journal about even on a flat screen, how do you make things more visual? Because we have columns of text that are basically gray now in academia, and I find that really quite uninspiring, sterile, and horrible. I got this wonderful new book, and you will all benefit from me not holding it up this time, so you don't need to buy it. But it's typographic firsts, and it has a picture of the very first successful Gutenberg Bible, and it's got all these single letters with a red slash through them. It was so much more visual, so much more informational than what we're using today. So the experiments over the weekend back and forth with Bob was doing things like when you write yourself, bold the important thing of a section. But then when you read a document with bold, that can sometimes be a bit too heavy, with a lot of bolding. So one thing we're thinking about is when you export, convert the bold to normal text. However, all the other text, make it slightly gray. Right? And that is just beginning to have a language in 2D that visually helps you offset. We've done some tests, and I'll put it on the Slack because it's not really pertinent to this now. But yes, we need to step into the 3D realm of this, and it's so hard to do. So that's why I'm really glad we're having this basic discussion today, because if we think about all the potential, we will get nowhere. So we're just trying to whittle down a few things we're not interested in today. So I'm going to skip to the next question, which is XR preferences. And I'm just going to ask you guys, because these are obvious questions, what your feeling is. Number one, is there more of an appetite for VR or AR, or both? And if so, how should we switch between them? Dene and I would suggest that it's both. However, we need to have some further discussions probably on for what task. What Fabien has already built is clearly AR, because it's all about using the physical space. You can't do that in VR if it's not mapped. Brandel, please.
So, in a trivial sense, augmented reality is there to augment the space that you have. It's not especially good at being able to invoke or construct spaces that you don't have. It feels really gross and bad if you throw virtual objects to a distance that's greater than the space that you actually have around you. If you have an object in ARKit, for example, and it's a bunk bed, and it's in the middle of your living room, and that the space it occupies is open, it looks really awesome. If you throw that 5 meters into a wall, it simply looks broken because of the mismatch in the overlap. So to that end, you can't make spaces unless you're in spaces that are for that. So you can go and put an entire house on a soccer field, on a great big open space if you want, and do so in an augmented reality. But if you're indoors, if you're in a space where you don't have the entire sort of region to denote a room or a building, then that is much better served by virtual reality. So in that sense, the scale of what's on offer, what's practical to be able to do, is dictated by AR versus VR, and the flexibility of that. So I would say that AR is for objects, where VR can be for spaces, is a reasonable dictum to follow. Yeah.
That makes sense, of course, Brandel. I would say additionally, with the kind of information we're dealing with here, what Fabien has already been building is putting things on walls and being able to move them around. And if you have okay, let me put it in another way. That's amazing what Fabien has done, and I think we need to go further. However, for VR, you can't expect an ordinary office worker, academic or otherwise, to have an empty room, obviously. If we're talking about VR, then we're most likely, and this is just me talking most likely, I'm very happy for disagreements on this, talking about a seated situation, which is what we mostly did last year. And this is why the transitions are really, really important, because if we do memory palace type things and in AR, you should be able to shut that off and now be in a VR situation where you are expected to be seated for different work. And that's why at the very end of this, we're looking at different environments and how they go together. Yeah, Dene.
When I was working with Bob Horn, let me put my hand down, hang on a second. There you go. When I was talking to Bob Horn about his upcoming talk on the 20th, we went through his book together, and I made a lot of notes when I read the book. And one of the things we talked about is how we can organize XR environments so that it can be immersive. We can use our bodies to be embodied, right? To use a space, because that's the point about the VR environment, right? And so we were imagining that we would have a book environment, like a collection, like the Future of Text, and each section would be its own room, and you would walk through the rooms, right? And so we would organize things in a spatial way, which made a lot of sense to me. So and I like the idea of walking through space, even if we're just using the teleporting tool to do that with XR, with VR. But I like the idea of physically moving. Because I do think there's a connection between physically moving and learning. The kinesthetic learning is very important. And I was one of those kids that was always having to touch things to learn. It drove parents crazy, always having to do something. And I find even now in teaching all these years that my students learn by doing. They learn by using their hands and by moving around. And so when people walk into my classroom and they see all this action and people rolling their chairs around the room and doing all this stuff, it freaks them out. But what they don't understand is all of that is part of the learning process because the whole body's being used. And so there's a connection between that. So.
Yeah, I think that is very, very important, Dene, especially the physical moving. And as you and I have been talking about, my learning experience of XR included many realizations of this stuff, our hands, right? It's easy if you just kind of sit at a desk and try to imagine VR, to imagine the visual, but to be able to interact with gestures and stuff is so massive, right? And the body, like Fabien's wristwatch utility thing, these are really important things to go further. So XR is not just visual, it is being able to move in the environment. And we kind of have to decide on what that'll mean for our work, because I think we agree that it's not realistic that anyone will have a large empty room. So when they then need to move about, the difference, because Dene and I have been talking a lot about this, and we passionately agree, but it's difficult. How can you toggle between the physical movement being what you need and the virtual movement being what you need? Sometimes you need the other. And to be able to go from one state to another will be fascinating. Fabien, please.
So, well, technically speaking, first of all, I think for year 2, it's supposed to be VR, according to what we've written. It doesn't mean we shouldn't explore other things, but that's like written down. Now, one thing that is I don't know, funny, I guess, is that most of us actually have access to a large empty space. We just rarely think about it and do it. But if you book a meeting room and you don't have to invite anybody else, can be at your university, at your office, in a library. Okay, it's not huge. It's not like 10 by 10 meters, but it's probably like 3 by 3 at least. And you use it for half an hour, whatever. You do your whatever crazy thing you do in VR, and then you go back with whatever you've done and saved, and then you can switch to AR, you can switch to even 2D or whatever you want. So I'm a little bit worried that if we limit ourselves, like my office, home office is not that big, but it doesn't mean that I should limit myself to thinking without that volume or that space, because I think it's a little bit tricky that if we do this, it limits a bit like the potential, the imagination, the craziness of things we can do. And then, because if we do something that is genuinely interesting, a little bit challenging to get, let's say booking a meeting room, and not everybody has access to this, in my opinion, but it shows there is value, in my opinion, then people will eventually be motivated enough to at least try to get like the device and the space and do have this experience, even if it's to have that experience only once, like the same way, for example, you go to the movie theater rather than watching a thing on your mobile phone. It's not the same thing, but like the experience is literally different. So I would personally tend to be more into like, let's go into crazy things, like making a big volume into large space, and eventually, if need be, to still keep in mind that, yes, I take the plane, for example, to go to Vancouver, and then when I'm in the plane, I don't have access to a 10 by 10 space. So it means the information still in some way, some forms needs to be manipulable, need to be accessible through that reshaped, basically, space.
So just as a point of reference, we can do anything we want with our XR, because the argument or the proposal for the Sloan Foundation was XR. It wasn't just limited to VR, but we wanted to work with VR because of Apple Vision Pro and what it was doing for changing the way VR was functioning. So we can do whatever we want, but I want to stick with VR myself, if that's okay with. But I don't mind AR experimentation either, but I think it makes more sense for us to be playing around with VR because there's not a lot of that right now in the academic world.
A very quick jumping in, sorry, Frode. It's from a technical standpoint, WebXR is precisely the kind of technology that allows whatever kind of effort is put into VR or AR to be put the other way around. That being said, it's also not magical in the sense that you cannot expect, let's say, computer vision where like you recognize, I don't know, a window, whatever, or things that are. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of things we try one way or another. It's probably going to be usable with, let's say, from VR to AR or the other way around. But for example, some of the interaction where we use it will require a bit of deeper thinking and actually reconsider like how we do things. But it's not like if we try just VR, then it's all lost. The work is not applicable. Most of it will probably, like, the overlap is big enough that it's not wasted effort.
And this is why we're having this discussion today. This is such a great point because I was a bit wary when you started on some of what you're saying, Fabien, but you are dead right. We don't all have access to meeting rooms, and meeting rooms have tables and chairs. They're not clean, but it is a really important point that we should be able to use that space. And if we're lucky enough to have a room that can be literally mapped onto XR in 3D or just nothing in it, of course we should use that. Yes, that should be an extension. And how we extend from sitting, like you and me in Brussels at the coffee shop that we really like, putting on headsets and working with those walls in that room to a massive meeting room, to going into VR, I think will be really key to our research. One of the things that I found really interesting, especially coming back from Brussels and watching movies on my headset on the train, a lot of the movies now are 3D. And it's nice, but of course it's a single viewpoint 3D. So in many senses, it's actually a gimmick, right? It doesn't necessarily add that much informationally. So when we ourselves are looking at going into XR and back again, a lot of what can be done in XR can be flattened as an end temporary product to a 2D screen, and that's fine. But to find out how to do that, first of all, it'll be useful, but then to find out the cases where it can't really be done, that will be amazingly golden. And that will probably happen in the translations between a little bit of 2D, but also between AR and VR, to go between them. Because, Fabien, being in your room right where you are now, moving a piece of knowledge from here to there, sculpting it, that very beginning is so powerful, right? And that is an AR, but how can that be then magnified in a VR setting? I think this is really feeding into our questions. So thank you for that, Fabien. That it helped click something in me. Mark, please.
So I'll rattle through 5 quick points that I jotted down from various things. So I'll just go in the order I wrote them. One of the things is we've talked about, space not available, but the other way to look at it is this is an opportunity to explain to people who might not be thinking about that as something to invent in. So if we have a need for spaces that we don't have, whether constructed or literal, then this is still useful work to do. So even if we're looking at something we don't have at the moment, it's helping create space for people who can then say, right, there's a need that needs to be filled. I'm also thinking, we talked about sort of movement and thinking about, okay, well, think about how we negotiate the issue of movement when we're not physically moving ourselves. So sometimes we want to, but other times, especially if you're doing sort of sitting work, if you want to walk around a memory palace when you're sitting, you're probably not going to push your wheelie chair around the office. So that's another thing I think for us to negotiate. I made reference of MR in the chat because I think we keep missing it out, and it's a perfectly valid part of the XR family. Essentially, it's the reverse of AR. It's bringing the virtual bringing the real into the virtual. So you're basically in a virtual thing, but you have some real things come through. Locative storytelling, I think, is one of the places where it crops up. And it seems to have quite a foothold in the area of sort of games and interactive fiction, which is why it should interest us, because there are people doing interesting and exploratory things with text in that area. I wrote to myself movement and writing. So we're talking about writing and movement, and I'm not sure yet I understand how the two are connected. They're things you want to do, but I think we might like to think how those two actually really fit together. I don't have any answers for that. And the last thing is something that came up tangentially. Someone was talking to me about, they were showing me something where they had a card metaphor. And they're very happy to show me that they could click a link and make it turn around and show the back. And I thought, well, wait a minute, we have latent spaces in AI now that are n-dimensional. Why does my card only have to have two faces? I understand the skeuomorphic part of that, but I think, no, we're really missing the point. Going to sort of Rob's thing about what he wants to write, well, why can't I have n faces to my card? I could have a scene where each face of the card is, say, the characters or the location or something else. I mean, you can pick your own locus of this, but again, everything I'm doing at the moment makes me want to step away from all the things I've learned, which are very, very much mired in the world of physical paper and things. So we still think in terms of, people love to talk about Luhmann's boxes of cards. I would bet money that if he were alive today, he would not be writing on index cards. You know, this is someone who was exploring the limitations of what he could do with knowledge and indexing it with the technology he had at the time. We have other more exciting technologies, so I think we should look at that, and we should absolutely embrace the fact that in XR we have an environment that we create for our own needs. So it doesn't even need to be three-dimensional. I mean, we touched on things like, hyperbolic spaces and things, and I think there's something to actually think about there. So rather than merely try and create what we have, we see with our eyes around us inside an effective thing, I think there's going to be actually a lot more enterprising, and have as many dimensions as we jolly well need, and to be able to pivot between them. I think that's a really interesting thing. It's very hard to do. You can't walk backwards in time in a physical space, but you could in a creative one. I'll stop there. Thanks.
I was going to say, I mentioned this to Frode this morning, Mark. So this is a response to you, and that is when I just joined the Quest 3 Fitness Supernatural group. So I'm doing workouts with them. Real interesting, right? And I also play Beat Saber a lot for exercise. And so I found it very off-putting to have these people talking to me while I'm trying to box these things coming at me, these circles. I also found it obnoxious that I was standing on a little round circle looking out at the two Tetons, right? The question is, why do I need the Tetons to help me hit boxes? Why do I need someone telling me how to hit the boxes? Once I learn how to do it, I don't need them to clue me on. The point that I'm paying $8.99 a month should be a clue that I'm interested in doing this, right? And I'm there currently, and I don't need them to nag me because they can't see me anyway. So when they say good going, and I'm like, what the hell? You don't even know what I've done, you idiot, because they're standing in front of you as if they really are there. I'm telling you this because what I'm saying is, when I'm reading, I don't want to be in an environment that's going to take my mind off what I'm doing. I don't want to see the Tetons when I'm working in my space. The point of XR for some of us is a space that is immersive, that we can decorate, design any way we want, so that we're not being sidelined. Right now, I'm in my space here. It's here with you, looking at all of you, but I also have a cat gnawing at the door trying to get in. I've got email. The first day of school is today. I've got a bazillion email coming in at me, people trying to get in classes. I've got squirrels out on the outside my window I'm looking at. I mean, I'm just over stimulated. And I can't concentrate. And so if we ask ourselves, why are people not focused anymore? It's because we've got all this stuff going on, right? I just want to be here with you, right? But we're all looking around. We're all having to do this stuff. And so my response to the notion of XR is I don't want stuff in there. I just want me and the thing I'm trying to interact with, so I can damn well do my job, right? And read and write. Frode.
Just highlighting something on our page here. Please feel free to reload. This is great. So you asked the question, Mark, earlier, I think, about the kind of point of walking about. What I mean primarily with that is muscle memory, for one thing, and another memory, and also plus just getting a bit of exercise, right? So that's an important part of that, and also being able to use the real space. Now, Dene, I passionately agree with your need for focused spaces as being really, really important. I need that too. I mean, I'm one of these hoodie-wearing people who will easily do this if I need to shut things up. So that is really, really important. I think because we don't have super much time, if you don't mind, guys, we move down to the workspaces section, because it'll help us narrow down some of these discussion points. But Fabien, before we do that, please go ahead.
Yeah, so first a quick remark on the chat. I put like the Quest, I think only the Quest 3, but maybe the other, they have the open interface, meaning that you have air that goes through. It doesn't sound like much, but if you're doing sports, it means sweating, maybe still sweating quite a bit if you're doing sports properly, but a lot less still, and you're not like heating up your forehead basically. So I recommend this. Now for something a little bit more serious, I worry honestly when I see, first, user experience where, for example, Meta is going to make any kind of experience a social experience, because Meta, who is Facebook, that makes the most popular headsets, in the end, what they sell is connection, and I put big quotes on this. They sell advertisement, but in practice, what they do is, they say connecting people, I think is the motto. And so they were trying to stuff your face now virtually with like yet another, person. And now I can also put quote on this because they also use AI as fake person now. But anyway, the point is, I worry because they are starting to do multitasking in VR, namely that you receive notification, you can switch from one app to the other, etc. So if for people, including me for sure, who want to be in VR to be somewhere else, and that somewhere else, like in order to feel there, you cannot have like notification of, oh, you have a meeting there, and oh, you have this, you have that, like, oh, your daily life is, I don't know, an appointment with your doctor. Is like, no, I'm trying to be away. I'm trying to be in, like fighting dragons or whatnot. Like, don't tell me about the upcoming bill. It's like, it's really honestly drives me nuts, because like that is the whole point of VR, is to be somewhere else. And if you have notification that break the immersion constantly, like this is missing it. So notification or switching apps and copy paste and whatnot that we have in a normal OS, a normal operating system, is not necessarily bad per se, but I think that the potential for misuse, and the example, Dene, that you shared, to me, it goes the wrong way, basically. It's going like, we made the device and it works, technically speaking, it's amazing, and now we go back somehow to the things we did before. So I worry. It doesn't mean we're locked there, and we will have to do like that we will submit to this kind of things. But it's another, actually I gave it to a friend, but I have another VR headset, the Lynx, which is Android, and you can root it, and basically you control everything on the headset. You don't have to accept this kind of user experience for basically enshittification. But yeah, so it's a long run to say that it's an actual risk of XR. Like if some of the few companies that actually build headsets and sell to a very large audience reshape back their experience to go from something that is a generally novel experience and potentially of awe and of a lot of positive feeling to like, hey, here's slapping it out on your face. That's not like conducive to immersion and again storytelling, but also like supporting cognition, like having deeper and better thoughts. So I think we need to be quite cautious about this kind of trends.
I have many thoughts before we jump into workspaces on this. First of all, I am not a fan of Facebook. I have recently learned through the BBC, of all people, the amount of censoring they're doing in specific different countries on specific issues. I'm not going to go into what issues here, but I spent Christmas and New Year's in Norway, and I saw a lot more posts on Facebook about an issue that I'm passionate about than I do in the UK. So clearly they don't do the same amount of filtering. So that's a huge issue. The ads are a huge issue. And almost flippant way, I'll say that notifications, you can actually turn them off. I do think they're important, though, to be able to have the option to have them or not have them, because I really do think it is very, very important for the user to choose the level of immersion they want at specific times. Sometimes it is really important to be away from the world. Other times you need both. And as I know, Fabien, you and me passionately agree, data-wise, you should never be fully away. You should always have a way to move your data somewhere else. Since you mentioned copy paste, I know you meant it in a specific way. But then there is the really important aspect of walking down the street with your music in your headphones. You're in the same place, but if you listen to some cool 70s movie music, you're literally somewhere else as well, right? So how the environment you are in feels to you, there are so many ways to change that. And I think that is really important. I'm glad you brought that up because with the headset, you have a full range of all these things, and it's easy to jump into just the VR things to go away from it. But right, on that notion, since we only have half an hour left, let's look at the workspaces. I've written some things here that Dene and I have discussed. They may be right, they may be wrong, but we want to get a sense of what kind of workspaces we want as a community, right? So library, since we discussed that at length a year ago, just means a collection of stuff. What the collections are will need their own discussions. There will be like a downtown library, there'll be your own personal library, all these things. And then, yeah, I think the other ones are more self-explanatory. What are your feelings on where the kind of environments you want? Yes, Fabien, back to you.
Yes, quick comment on the library thing is I started to follow. There is in Paris a library called the Vrins Library. It's a library about philosophy. It's one of my favorite places on earth, even if I don't go there often enough anymore. But when I was living in Paris, I went there quite often. It's literally mind expanding. I'll put the link in the chat. But the point is, now, of course, through the link, you also have access to the website, and yet the experience will be totally different. In terms of serendipity, like you start to browse, they have their own selection, but maybe you meet someone there, maybe there is a presentation, maybe you take the wrong book, and next to it, there is the quote-unquote right book for you. So in terms of the library itself, yes, a bunch of documents, whatever format, whatever they are, I get that. But when I started to browse the website again, I'm like, I'm not inside that library anymore with that book. It's a bookshop, but it's a place with books, quality one with curations and all. So it is an experience that I miss. And it is an experience that I want to have again, basically. And it's not an experience I had in any of my prototype or any experience in XR that were handling documents, let's put it that way. So it is something that I'd like to have again. And again, I don't really know how to do this. I don't really know if it's possible. I don't really know if it would be better than the real thing. But I think it's definitely worthwhile to explore this. And it might mean going to an actual bookshop and like notice our feelings, notice like what is productive, not productive, what is reproducible this way. I'm not sure how, but I think it's worthwhile.
That's so super cool. So we're in the category of library, I would say. And it goes to the very first question, what kind of document? Is it an article or is it a book we're interested in? And we've decided on book, especially our next book. However, in a library, a magical library, do you only want to see a virtual representation of a book or its chapters, for instance? Do you want to see them by authors maybe and different things for the serendipity you're talking about? That could be a really worthwhile thought experiment, at least, how to choose to lay out even your own library, because I'm sure all of us have books that we have forgotten there are really good bits in.
Well, I have a library. I mean, I carry one on my computer and have been since this 2000, early aughts. And it's all done in, because it's digital, everything's miscellaneous, right? Totally searchable. So I don't need to worry about, I want bibliographical information. I want their name, I want the title, I want the book title, I want the year it was published, because I can go very quickly. And I did this because I was in that postdoc and traveling around with Ascot and his group. And I needed to get access to my library quickly for the postdoc. So I don't think the question you're asking, I mean, it's like, I want it all, right? We want it all there. And I want the name of the author as much as I want the title and keywords. I mean, all of that is important.
But Dene, sorry, Mark, just a brief one. Dene, one thing you've done, I'm sorry that I keep repeating it, is you've highlighted annotations, which is so important because they are both in the document and not in a way. They're yours, then the author's. So I think it really expands it to be able to have like an annotation section in a library as well.
Well, I guess I should mention that in my library, I also have I have the articles, but I also have my notes. And my notes contain not just an annotation, but like on page 9, highlighted, all the notes that I would put on the inside of the book, I repeat on a piece of paper. And then that becomes digital in my library. So I can get to those quotes quickly and know the exact page numbers, right? So it's not just annotations. It's like all my responses to that book, to that article is there. And I think that's useful.
Mark, are you okay holding on for another minute? Okay, thanks. Because I think, Dene, you are now, in my little mind, defining the whole thing, which is when we actively read something for our work, we will underline, we will write commentary, like you said, and that is definitely part of authoring. And I remember my esteemed supervisor, Wendy Hall, try not to laugh, Mark. She said to me in one of the little meetings in the beginning, she would love to make a document just by pulling things in. Right. So I could imagine one of our dreams could be that, Dene, you've gone through all these, to have used the case study here, all these different articles, books, whatever, got all these notes and annotations. And all you need is be like Minority Reports or Fantasia, do a little flap with your hands, and you made a new document that's totally coherent. And it has spatialized components based on its origin, timing, references, situations, relationships, and so on, right?
This is what I wanted Andrew to build last year, right? Remember, he was pulling all that out. I was wanting to pull things into, like, pull this sentence out here, pull this out here. And so we're already moving that direction last year. But we stopped because we were running out of time and year. Hi, Leon.
I'm going to write some notes on that. And yeah, hi, Leon. And Mark, please go ahead. I'm going to write some on that.
Okay. I was just thinking, so this discussion of whether we want books or chapters or something, and what I was just about to say was almost hinted at by arguing what Dene then commented on, which is that maybe we want to step away from these old-fashioned terms. I think it gets in the way because what Dene just said, no, I want the bit I want the bit I need. I want it in the form that I want to see it. And the challenge to us is to actually unpick what that means. I mean, the community I spend a lot of time working at the moment, which is a sort of basic textual analysis tool thing, is what's really interesting to me is all these people turn up at the door of the community having got there because everything else they've used has failed them. And yet, with all the choice that's on offer, the only question they ever ask is, how do I use this? They actually want to be told which button gets them the banana most quickly. And that both saddens me, and I think it's a really interesting challenge, because that's implicit in what we're doing here. So in a way, we really should discipline ourselves to step away from terms like library and chapter and reimagine them if we're going to do stuff in XR, imagine what they're like in XR. Then we can link them back to the legacy forms. So we won't lose anything. But if we insist on dragging, but it's the rear view thinking thing. If we drag these terms with us, they actually impose a weight on our thinking that I think makes it more difficult to do the new things. To think about, okay, well, what if I can have a relationship with this body of text that I have? And have really quite subtle interactions, to the point that's being alluded to there about annotations. So the annotation can itself almost be a narrative through the document. It's just another way of passing through that text assembly that doesn't touch any of the... I mean, you couldn't do that in a book without somebody printing you a book for you specially of that set of annotations. We don't have that constraint anymore. So if we turn it round, and instead of thinking about the things that we used to pull off the shelf, but we think in terms of what we want to do with these bodies of text, I think that will allow us a lot more freedom to actually, do some innovation in this space.
Can I respond to that quickly, Fabien? I think what I've been thinking about is we need to have workshops with people to teach them how to think in XR. I mean, this is what the class was, what I taught last semester, right? I had 24 students in that class trying to teach them how to think in XR. And I struggle with that, right? Even with the young people. But ultimately what we have to do is teach them the big picture, to think about what can be done here before we start saying, do this. Because they don't get it. They're fed candy by Meta. Right. I spent a lot of time during the holidays going through all the Meta apps, and it's just crap. It's all crap. And so when my students think of VR, they think of these stupid games, right? That have really little, they're not interesting, really. It's just more of the same. It's just plumped up. Right. Okay, Fabien.
Yeah, quickly on this first, and then to step back a bit. First, I think is thinking in VR and otherwise, and letting people have the space, and I think honestly, including ourselves, to think differently, including with new tools, like not stuck with sticky notes like this. And it's going to be a silly example, but I have fancy sticky notes which have different shapes and colors, and I don't know how many people have weird sticky notes, but you can make your own sticky notes. I have sticky notes like in shape of how do you say, clouds, like there are little bubbles and all. It's a very low basic example, but still it's like you can make your own physical tools to try to think differently. And of course you can expand that to XR and whatever. And I think taking the time to do this, I definitely think it would help. And indeed, people need to be able to have this kind of safe space, this bubble of this short amount of time. And at worst, it's shit, and they go home and like, oh, I tried this, and it was kind of fun but pointless, and that's fine. But otherwise, like, oh, just repeating what they already know, and I think it's just very boring. So yes, I'm all for workshops for sure. Now a little bit of bragging, sorry, but I mentioned I use my wiki, and I've been using it for I forgot, but more than 10 years, let's say 15 years. And Elijah mentioned the Kipu, the Inca method of writing with the strings. And in it, I read about it, or I saw some in a museum, at least in 2009, because thanks to my wiki, I found back the reference, which I put in the chat. Why do I do this? It's not just for bragging, is because one thing that in that nice article that I recommend, the author wrote about, and I'll just read it, collapsing levels as you dynamically shift focus for varying amount of time and attention. And when to answer back then your question, Frode, like what do I need in this virtual library or in that volume? Do I need just the title? Do I need the whole book? Do I need the chapters or at least the table of content? I need it all, because in advance, I don't know indeed where my focus will be, and thus being able to dynamically change it is what allows me to say, okay, here I'm very shallow. I don't have time to read the full book or whatever. I just need the title. but maybe actually I do, and I want to check in the table of content and then in that chapter. So that is totally dynamic. It changed on the task, and so I basically need it all. I also need the annotations and the dated annotations, because here I know it puts me back, let's say 2009. Did I already think about this? I did not have XR, for example. So of course, I need it all. I don't know how, again, but to me, it's pretty obvious. I need the content, I need the table of content, annotation, all that.
Yes. So this is important, and I'm very grateful for this. We talk about shapes a lot, and so far I think it's been the shapes between of configurations of knowledge objects. But Fabien, you bring up the notion of a cloud as a thought, and you said it's kind of a fun. But yes, that is really, really important. And I think you're now also talking about WikiXR, the notion of being able to do something like that. And to me, and we do need to go back to the environments in a second, it's beginning to make sense, because one of the features I'm trying to get implemented in my own software reader and author is you're reading a PDF, something's interesting, you hit a keyboard shortcut or use the context menu, and it takes the selected text into your research document and author with a citation. The idea is then you can keep writing notes about it, blah, 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 but it knows where it came from, right? Really simple example, very simple. But what we are talking about here is tearing things apart, right? Adding our own stuff and reconfiguring. So that means we're going to have to spend some serious quality time on metadata, obviously. We're going to have to store as many useful things as possible. And I think we really need to start spying on the user for themselves. We talked about that as well. When was something done? Where was it done? What concurrent things were happening at the same time? For instance, we have a meeting now. My system should know that. So it should know that thing I wrote down when I had a meeting with Leon, for instance, et cetera, et cetera. And now that we have a better sense of what kind of things we want to put together, after Mark, please go ahead, Mark. We will maybe look at the kinds of environments where we would do different kind of configurations. Mark, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, well, indeed, so both the last two things about the metadata. And one of the things I'd also say about that is to start thinking of it again, not in how do I get metadata from a construct I used to have, but rather how do I collect the information that would enable me to make the equivalent to the construct I used to have. Again, it's breaking the cycle of the legacy ideas. And in terms of the thing that Frode just mentioned about, in a sense, spying on the user, and I do understand what you mean by that, and I don't see that as I understand what you mean by it. It's not a sort of scary thing. Is that, of course, the one thing all this cleverness doesn't capture is your intentionality. It can tell you had 3 meetings at the same time, or your blood pressure was this on this day or something. It doesn't tell you why. It doesn't tell you why you suddenly wanted at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to view this annotation in that paper over there. So the missing bit, I think, that I see in a lot of all this sort of new cleverness we're bringing along is there's very little attempt to have a meaningful interaction between the new automations and the one thing that they have no grasp of at all. Thanks.
I will respond to that really briefly, but Abhirami, I'm sorry, I will practice your name over time. If you don't mind having a look at the workspaces, because if you don't mind also, I will ask you some questions in a second. Mark, the question of intentionality is really, really important. The way that I've been able to address that over the last 2 months for my own use is this thing that you and I talked about, which is implemented called marking text. So what I have now in my diary, my journal, actually, I'll show you real briefly because I think it has a higher point, and then we'll look at that 1 second. There's all the beautiful people. So I open author, I do launch my journal. You can all see it, right?
Yeah.
So here is some stuff I've been writing. I'm trying to write now about, what movie we saw and whatever, plus work. So here's the key thing. We see here, discuss with Dene. I put these things together, we need to discuss, and then some other things. These are things in my journal that need to be actioned by me. So when I fold it into an outline, they are here. I have intentionally set that as a special thing. But once it's done, I unmark it. I don't remove the text, and it is part of my diary, journal, all the things into one. And I found it extremely useful because if you write something and it goes in, whether it's paper or not, and it disappears, how do you do that? So the act of being able to do an annotation or a note or something, and to be able to, in a convenient way, say why or how, completely agree with you, Mark. That is really important, and there are many ways we need to look at that. We have 10 minutes left. Not that we're going to, map out the entire year, but Abhirami, do you have any thoughts on what kind of workspaces might be cool or useful?
So when I think of a workspace, I'm going to the idea that comes to my mind is adaptability. So how can you individualize a workspace? Or it is very subjective again, but like how would you adapt a space that is also holistic, that addresses the kind of work that you're doing and also allows fluidity. So that is the idea that comes to my head right now. But while I'm listening to all of you, I have so many thoughts, and I also realize that there's so much I have to observe and learn to actually contribute to the kind of discussion we are having right now.
Very kind of you to say that. And yes, I appreciate what you said. This community is very casual, very open, and very serious all at once. Come and go as you want to. There's no obligation to go to every meeting. And if you have a stupid question, that will be the first time ever. So don't worry about having to listen before asking questions. There is a really, even though you're studying the related field, there's a real benefit to not having overthought some of these things. So we're very grateful for what you said. Now, can we please go back and consider some of these specific environment with what you said about adaptability? Actually, Dene, sorry, please go ahead first.
Yeah, before we go, I'd like to say 5 minutes before in 3 minutes, we should go through the schedule that's coming up so people know what's coming up, because we do have some scheduled talks. So that's a good way to wrap up today. If we can just revisit our schedule and you can pull that up, Frode, for everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, will do. Yeah. So sorry, I just wondered if you had anything more you wanted to say on environments before we do that.
Were you asking me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Not really. I want to listen to you and also try to come up with something and do that.
Okay, that's of course absolutely fine. Right, I put the link in here to the schedule, which should be easy to find on the page on the site. So
and also the next talk is going to be text and non-Euclidean space, which might be very interesting for you. And Fabien, if you and I can get together this week and talk about next week's discussion, that'd be very helpful for me to know how we're going to proceed. On the 20th, Bob Horn is talking. I met with him at length and talked to him about what he's going to be talking about. Please look at the book. The book is free download. It's on the Internet Archive, and I've mapped out the pages specifically that we're looking at. So if you click on that link, it takes you right to the talk. You can see the questions. The thing I loved about the book is he starts to think about VR already. The book came out in the late 80s. So I give you the specific pages. So even if you don't want to read the whole book, which I encourage you should, you can just go right to the pages that we're referencing to make this easy for you, right? And it doesn't take much time. It's going to be like the fireside chat. I'm going to be feeding him questions. He has plenty of time to think about it. But I think it's going to be useful following up after our talk next week that we're doing about non-Euclidean space. And then, Frode, you want to talk about what is authoring in XR?
I think it's going to be a continuation of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, we should have a lot more information and more ways to think about this. And this gives you time to go through that text that the webpage that he shared with us all. In
Leon,
February. Yeah, go ahead, Leon.
Yeah, I was wondering who's going to do this non-Euclidean talk.
That is going to be Fabien and me. And we're going to be adding information to that. If you click on that link, you'll have some more information there.
Yeah, so this is kind of important. On the page here with the schedule, there's the Zoom room, which obviously you have, also the add to calendar, so you always have it. But if you click on them, there is more information on all of these things. And I don't know if you've seen already, Dene, but we're able to put the book on Amazon, so I'll do that today. So that'll be nice.
Did he send us a note back? Did he send us a note back? I haven't looked at the email.
It just came in as you were speaking there, and I couldn't help myself.
Perfect. Good. Perfect. So it's going to be $20, I think, is what we determined for. We're trying to get the book online, and we couldn't do it without permission from Sloan, and we had to promise Sloan we're not making money on the book because everything has to be free. So all we're doing is recouping Frode's cost, which is about, I think it was $19 roughly.
It's really annoying because I have to make a profit, but it's a small profit. They won't let me sell it without this minimal profit, which is just really weird. But on that note, in closing, I'm so grateful for today because it was hard writing the questions, and Dene and me went through so many different things. And what we've come together today is saying we don't know what kind of things we're going to be authoring with, but we have a little bit more feel for it. It's almost like in the space, you know what I mean? So I look forward to continuing this with everyone.
And just quickly, I was going to mention in February, we have the hypertext workshop proposal. So we want your input on this because we've been asked to put on a workshop, hands-on workshop. And then we've got open time for February. So if you have ideas that you want to present, Leon, if you want to present something, Brandel, please, let's fill in those dates with some specific talks. And for those of you who weren't here the last time, I think this might be for you, Leon, is that during our Future of Text Sunday retreat, we decided to offer two types of Monday meetings. The ones like this, where there's like 10 to 10 people max. But then we're going to be offering a little larger, which would be about 20 people. And that's what I'm hoping will happen for Bob. So that's going to be a little bit larger group, about 20 people. And then the symposium's 50. So 10, 20, 50 are ideal. So, but please add information if you wanted to join us and give a talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So just briefly, there are some things that we can start writing right now. And I really would like if you could do that. We have a journal now on the website, which you're all welcome to use, or your own blog or whatever. I don't mind at all. But here are some of the questions that if you write it down, even if it's a paragraph, it's fine. So I'm just going to whiz through them because we're out of time. In what ways do we feel now that knowledge can be spatialized? What dimensions are inherent? What can be imposed? How does AR and VR differ? We've learned a lot, at least I have in this call even, right? What do we consider the point that's unique to XR? Of course, it's visual, but it's also your body interactions. It's sound. It's a lot of different things. What have we figured out so far, right? It is changing a lot. And then there is questions of what emotional impact we would like to have on the user trying this. We talked a little bit about that. You may have a different perspective, which would be great. And finally, two little things. One is, what does authoring mean in this scenario? What does it really mean, right? I have to re-say it every. Oh yeah, Dene, you got to go. Thank
There
you.
you go. I got a 10 o'clock meeting. Bye, everybody.
See you soon.
Thank you, Dene.
I'm glad Dene had to go because I've said this to her so many times with other people. But I'm going to say it to you now. Ignorance is such a valuable commodity. It truly is. In fact, there you are, Fabien. Fabien, I've actually bought you a book. I'm going to use you as a case study for this closing bit here. It's called The Case for God by Karen Armstrong. And the reason I'm getting, it's the introduction. I'll recommend you read it because it really moved me. I was trying to, like all of you, log off over the holiday. And it talks about the really important thing about acknowledging our ignorance, which to her is religion. She doesn't separate God or nirvana. All of these states, all of these things to her are the same. She's a wonderful woman, met her many times. This also goes for our work as inventors. The more we use XR, the more prejudiced we will become. Right? The whole point of the future of text is to write down as naively as we can and build as we go. So that's why at the beginning of every year, I just beg everybody in the community, if you have some stupid idea or if you think it's brilliant, please write it down. If it turns out at the end of the year to be stupid, isn't that amazing? It shows you've changed, right? So that's why if you write down the new affordances of this possibility space, do that. Nobody here should think there is some bigger authority that knows everything because, look at Brandel. Brandel came here from the position of actually building real stuff and enjoying I'm guessing Brandel, banging up against all kinds of weird walls rather than just knowing a solution, because that would be boring. So with that, I thank you all and look forward to seeing you over whatever Mondays are suitable. We now start at hour because Dene and I, as co-POs, we need half an hour to get our head straight. Any other questions or comments before we launch into 2025?
I just want to thank you all for having me, and it was an enlightening session for me, and I look forward to joining the future sessions. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Very grateful you're here. Bye, everyone. Bye.